everything I've done has simply come from raising my hand and saying, I'll do it. And I just realized, if not me, who? And if not now, when? And so I found I was in a lot of rooms where there weren't people that maybe resonate with me. One thing I want people to know that I don't think the general veterinary profession knows about is
welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. Sometimes life's detours, delays, and even setbacks end up shaping your strengths. From last to leading the way, my guest today, Ashli Selke, knows that story well. From joining the U.S. Navy and getting high security clearance to becoming president of NAVTA, the National Association of Veterinary Technicians in America, and now founder of a new organization. You have to stick around until the end to learn more about that. But Ashli's journey is one of resilience, advocacy, and unstoppable passion for elevating the veterinary profession. Her path wasn't easy. She's open about being neurodivergent, juggling a military family life, and taking years to finally earn her credentials. But that persistence, that raise your hand and say yes attitude, has shaped her into one of the most influential veterinary technicians and advocates in the country. We'll talk about the power of volunteering, what real leadership looks like, and how legislation, title protection, and inclusion are reshaping the future of veterinary medicine, thanks to people like Ashli. So whether you're early in your career or deep into leadership, this conversation is your reminder that you can create impact no matter where you start. Let's get to my conversation with Ashli Selke. You had a little bit of an interesting start into your career journey. You actually joined the Navy, from my understanding.
Yeah.
So do you mind sharing a little bit about, did you like animals when you were little? So was there kind of like this starting interest? And then how did you decide to join the Navy?
Yes. So it's actually a funny story. I grew up with my grandparents. My parents were super, super young when they had me, like 16, 17. So I grew up with my grandparents. And I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I think like we all start out to want, but in high school, I didn't go for the grades. I was just like, I'll go to college, I'll do whatever. And I was just moving through the motions. And so I didn't set it up to like go into undergrad and then vet school. I didn't have those opportunities aligned for myself. But so what I did is I got into college and I actually moved 1,000 miles away from home. I went to college at Florida Gulf Coast University in Naples, Florida. So I went 1 year and I realized that a spring break lasts a really long time when you live in Florida. So my grandparents, they were like, look, we don't care what you do as long as you go to school. And so I was just in general studies and doing all that. And I kind of like wiggled my way out on spring break that first year. And so my parents were like, you don't get to come home. You get to join the military or go to college. And I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And so I had a friend who was in the National Guard. And I remember I was really poor. I was like, I'm a struggling 19-year-old who has nothing. I have like an air mattress and, I'm just trying to work my way through. And my granny was in the National Guard, actually. Like, I went over to his house and I was like, you can live? Like, you have a house and you can survive? And I was like, so I actually, I was like, you know what? I'm going to join the military. I didn't know what branch. And I knew it was probably best for me to have some structure in my life. And so I remember going into the National Guard because that's what my friend had done. And I looked up on the wall and I was like, are you the guys that wear berets? And they were like, oh, yeah, that's us. I was like, I can't do this. And like, I walked in. I was like, I can't do that. And so I honestly joined the Navy because I didn't want to be stationed like in the middle of nowhere. I have this like fear of like wide open spaces and like no trees and like no coverage. But yet I joined the Navy where you're like out to sea and there's nothing. But I joined the Navy because I knew I'd be on a beach, as I love the beach. And I really liked their outfits. That was really the gist of it. And so I actually, when I went and did my testing to join the military, like I scored super high. Like I was always smart. I just didn't put those steps where they needed to be, in the teenage years. And so I actually scored if I remember right, this was like 20 years ago, a 96 on the ASVAB, which was super great. Like, it's awesome. And so they're like, you can join any branch you want. And so I joined the Navy, and the job I chose was cryptological technical technician. So I was a crypto tech decoder. I, specialized in weaponry and advanced technologies. And I had a top secret clearance that I had to do an FBI 10-year background investigation from the FBI. They called all my ex-boyfriends. Like, over 10 years. They really do that. And so I got my clearance, and my schooling was the second longest school in the Navy. The shortest school in the Navy is 10 days. And it's like, the people on the aircraft that are like, go, like their boats is directing. They're like, all right, you go, flight. And so their schooling's only 10 days and mine was 2 years. So it's a long time. And so I had to do a 6-year contract because my schooling was so long. And so I absolutely loved the Navy. I learned structure, because I had to. I was the government's property. The only thing I got in trouble for, I actually got so sunburnt one time, and I got charged with an Article 93, which is destruction to government property. And I was like, what government property did I destroy? And they were like, you are the government property. Like, I had such a bad head sunburn that it hindered me from working. And so I called in sick, and I got charged with the destruction of government property.
What a hilarious story. That sounds very painful, but that is so interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, a whole different perspective.
It was really interesting. And then I used my GI Bill to go to vet tech school. Like, I could have gone on to like the FBI or CIA, with that job background, but I was like, I want to do what I've always wanted to do. I was like, I've always wanted to do this. And, I learned from being in the Navy that I have the capability. I worked hard, and I'm very loyal. So I was like, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to go to vet tech school. So I am diagnosed with ADHD on neurodiversity, but I didn't know it then. I wasn't diagnosed till later in life, just a few years ago. So vet tech school took me longer than it took everybody else. And I didn't understand why. I was doing what I was supposed to, but there were certain things that that didn't mesh with me. So it took me an extra year to do like the same schooling that everybody else did. I was like, I will work hard, I promise, and to get through it. And then also moving on, from vet tech school, there's the VT&E that you have to take the national exam. And I was a 4-time VT&E test taker. And then just different things happened. I was with my husband then, he's Army and I was Navy, and I had a little girl while he was in Afghanistan. And then I had another little girl. They're exactly a year apart. So actually one of my VTNEs was scheduled. I went into early labor. And so I called ABSB and I was like, hey, like, I'm in the hospital. I can't make it to my VTNE. And they were like, well, you're going to have to pay $80 and, you're going to have to reschedule that. And I was like, would you like to talk to the doctor? And they're like, well, if you can turn in your paperwork, like, we can reimburse and stuff. But I was like, this is really a hassle, guys. So it's like, now that years later I was, diagnosed properly, because a lot of time in women, it's diagnosed differently. And so, they're like, it's anxiety, it's this, it's so depression, it's so many other things. Looking back, I'm like, it totally makes sense why it took me an extra year. Like I wish I would have known. When I see people that have not passed the test, like on their first time, I'm like, listen, you are okay. I try to bring as much good vibes to them. I'm like, I am a 4-time test taker and I made it all the way to NAVTA presidency. Like, there is hope. Don't worry.
So I'm curious because when you were talking about the tests that you did for the military, you did really well. Mm-hmm. And then you're talking about having some struggles within that tech school and then those types of tests. How is the Navy testing you that was able to really allow your skills and gifts to come out? And what were you struggling with in tech school? And I want to ask this because for other people who may be struggling this, maybe help them identify if, oh, I'm struggling with that too. Maybe there's something similar. So that's why I'm asking. But what are the
Oh,
differences?
yeah.
Yeah, there.
So the ASVAB is the military test you take. But I think the difference was with that ASVAB test is testing you on different life skills and different things you've already done, things like ethics and things of that nature. And it kind of points you in the realm. Think of it as like taking a job placement test. You're like, oh, these are the things I'm good at. This is how I would handle this situation. So it's kind of like that. Whereas the BT&E is, 300 questions, 150 multiple choice questions, and, they're in different realms. And I think I was getting turned around, I was wondering, is this what I'm supposed to do with my life? Should I have stayed in the Navy? So I think different testing situations, just different scenarios.
That makes sense. And I'm so glad I asked a little bit about the military, because even your role in the military, kind of, to me, I'm making connections with what you kind of start to find is your gift on the veterinary side too. So you pass your test. I know you had other challenges too, because you did have a military spouse. So you had to move. So there were some other things that you had to do with getting, there's the CVT, the RVT, like you have both, and that because you're moving around there. I mean, like, walk us through some of those challenges too, and then eventually, starting to find the different areas that you're getting interested in.
Yeah, even once I've gotten out of school, so you got to think the BT&E is only offered at certain intervals throughout the year. So it wasn't like if I didn't pass it, oh, I can go take it next week. So I had to wait until either the next cycle or they give it. At that time, it was 3 times a year. And so you had to wait. And I was like, well, if I'm not ready. So that took a year and a half, 2 years to just pass the BT&E. And then you have to go on to the credentialing aspect. So I was in Indiana and then I was moving. So I applied in Indiana and then I had to move with my husband to Fort Campbell in Tennessee. And then so they're like, well, this is a different state. You've got to start all over. Like, that doesn't matter what you did up there. But my BTE score is like, you have to say like who they get sent to. You also have to pay for your BTE scores to be transferred. And so Tennessee, I thought, was a sharpshooter with their credentialing, because then I was in Tennessee and they're the only ones who were LVMT. And then I had to get I was working there and I had to get, it's all different, like a veterinarian to notarize that I'm a good character and, fingerprints. And then because I had to wait 6 months to go before the board, and also I had to go before the board previously, the state board, because if you don't pass your VT&E the 3rd time, in certain states, you have to go before the state board to be like, hey, can I take this a 4th time? Like, you have to be approved. And that's what I had to do. And so that was many years that took me to become a credentialed vet tech. And then I moved again to Arkansas. So I was like, well, do I just come back to Tennessee and pick this up in 3 months? So then I just went on to Arkansas and it just seemed to be an easier process. It was very do it and done. I was like, oh, I'm here for a while. And so that's where I got the CVT through Arkansas. And I have moved around a lot. So I came back to Indiana and I have an RVT. But yeah, it's a process to get all the different things. So, if there's anybody out there that thinks gosh, this is taking forever, I'm pretty sure I was on the 10-year track to become a vet tech. And I was one of those people too that I never worked in practice before I went to school. So that's a lot different than other people as well. So maybe that too could have factored into that VT&E. I never worked in vet med before. I was just like, I'm using this GI Bill and I'm going to school. And I was a bartender by night, So that's what I did.
So during all of this process, are you working in general practice? Are you working in emergency? What are you doing through all of this?
Yeah. So I got to delve into a lot of different things. I first started with volunteering while I was in school. I tried to volunteer for everything I could. So they called it Mutt Strut, where they get to walk around the Indy 500 track. So I volunteered for that. I volunteered for the Indianapolis Zoo. So I was a zookeeper every 2 weeks. I did the African plains animals. So zebra, kudu, wildebeest, vultures. We had the largest enclosure of the zoo. So I think it was the hardest job that nobody wanted. That's the job I got. So once I did my externship for school is when I got a job at Banfield Pet Hospitals. And I love Banfield. I was able to transfer my job to different states when my husband moved. So like I worked in Banfield in Indiana. I worked in Banfield in Tennessee. And then when we went to Arkansas, there wasn't a Banfield there was like one, and like they never would call me back. They were just trying to figure it out. So I was like, oh, let me see what else I can get into. So I actually applied and I became a vet tech instructor at a college, Harrison College. There was about 6 of the Harrison colleges, I believe, across the United States. As I was working there, one day I came in to find my students crying. And I was like, why are you crying? Why is everybody crying? And they're like, the school's closed. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, I think I would though. I was like, let me check my email because I just went to lunch. Like we were just here. And then sure enough, it was like effective immediately. Like all the locations at every school across that we had, those 6 schools, they all closed that day. My students were crying. The news channel came because the students had called. They're like, they stole our money. And I'm like, I didn't steal it. Oh, I just worked here. So I'm like, I'm here with you, you know? It was just, so then that was the first time I always had a job. I'd always had, you know, something to something. I'd never been without a job. And this was the first time I was thrust into not having one. So I moved to a lovely vacation town called Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Yep.
And it's lovely there. Love it. I always vacationed there as a kid, so that's why I wanted to move there. And so I just put my application in everywhere because in Arkansas, there's not a lot of credentialed veterinary technicians. My license number was 287. So I was only the 287th credentialed vet tech in that state. And where there were only about 180 practicing at the time I was. So that's not a lot of technicians. So I put my resume into all the local general practices and they're like, oh, we don't have anyone that's credentialed. We would love to bring you on board. You know, I had these people fighting over me. And I was like, whoa. I was like, calm down. And so I chose one that was just 2 minutes from my house. So it was rural medicine, but it was a mixed practice. So I got to work in mixed practice with, you know, we would do farm calls. Most of our was small animal, but we also were the hospital that did the zoo that was close by. So I've got to amputate alligator legs. And I mean, not me personally doing it, but like helping, you know, veterinarians do it. And enucleation, lemur, all kinds of cool stuff. But I got to learn there that doing the farm calls and being on call and emergency, I feel too like you should do all kinds of different things, not only to learn what you like, but also learn what you don't like. So I learned that I like temperature controlled environments. I like small animals. I was totally fearful of the large animal. Like I'm like, they know that I know that they know that they can kill me. It was like, that's our understanding here. But I did it. Anything I was brought to, I would always tell someone if I was uncomfortable, but I'd still, you know, get out there and do it. I just decided my next venture wouldn't be that. I worked there for, you know, about 3 years. That's kind of where I got into association leadership. In 2016, I decided to volunteer for the Arkansas Veterinary Technician Association. And that's where I kind of started my organized veterinary medicine leadership journey. I was their first director of marketing, so they hadn't had that before. Basically, I would take their website, revamp it, and then use social media channels, create those, and just kind of create their, you know, marketing to the world. I became a web developer, a web design. I put everything into, the 21st century, whatever century we're in. I made everything so you could use a credit card for dues. Like it was only like paper form that was like mailed in. And I was like, we need to get this to everybody. We had 82% coverage in that Veterinary Technician Association of all of the vet techs in the state, which is a huge number. I mean, granted, there's about 180, but we had 82% of them. So I was just able to address that. We did a lot of non-dues revenue. Then I became the NAVTA state representative. So each state chooses your representative that's kind of like your liaison to NAVTA. And so I became the state representative, and I'm still doing that. And then that tumbled into interim president when stuff turned over and all this. And then I applied for the NAVTA district representative. So just like AVMA's 11 districts, NAVTA chose to follow the same suit with those 11 districts. And I was the District 8 representative. So Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So basically, I championed to connect those organizations. I was like, hey, Louisiana, do you talk to Texas? Texas, do you talk here? Like, what do you guys need from NAVTA? We were one of the first in the district rep system. So we were kind of figuring it out as we go. That's when, too, I got to my last job before I was at Purdue University. I went to the only 24/7 specialty hospital in the state. It was called Arkansas Veterinary Emergency and Specialists. So if we could handle it, like you had to go to a different state. We only had one boarded surgeon in the whole state. We only had, one dentist that traveled in from Memphis every couple of months. So Arkansas is a smaller state. We don't have all of the amenities that other states had. And so then I moved up from working overnight emergency. I worked up to being the supervisor for the specialty surgery team. And so I was that liaison between, the state's only boarded surgeon and all of the referring DVMs of the state. So, he would be busy and the primary DVMs would call and be like, hey, I've got this situation. I'm like, he's in surgery right now. Like, they're like, I need help now. And I'm like, okay. So then I would be like, from the intercom, doctor, we have a stat situation and I need your help. So he's like trying to answer all these questions for me, but I was kind of like that liaison, that go-to in between. And so I made a lot of really good relationships with a lot of the veterinarians in the state. And so then that's kind of how the state association, the Vet Tech Association, and we kind of grew, and I made those relationships where we took our title protection to the state board, to this Veterinary Board of Medical Examiners. Because people get the VMAs confused with the Veterinary State Board a lot. So I made relationships with the VMA. They were wonderful. And, we were able to like grow and nurture that relationship. And like Arkansas, we have one of the most progressive practice acts. I'm not there anymore, but that's one of the only states that defines a veterinary technologist or a veterinary technician specialist. So there was a lot of good things that came out of it. Then I ran for NAVTA president. I used strategy with my neurodivergent brain. I was like, all right, there's like 17 people that ran for director. And then there's like 2 people that ran for president. I was like, I got way more of a shot running for president. I was like, I'm just going to go for it. So that was my campaign strategy. I was like, you got me. So they called me when I was still in Arkansas and they told me the good news. And I was so excited. I think I cried. I pulled over on the side of the highway. I was just so excited because that's what I want to do, is to champion for veterinary technicians and champion for people in our profession. Not just veterinary technicians, but veterinarians. Like, they're my best friends. And I see them working hard, and veterinary technicians, like, we just want to make you, happy all the time and, make so you can go home at night, when you want to. So I was just glad to do all of that.
So reflecting again a little bit,
Sure.
and all of this that you're doing, you're on a roll with the associations and getting up to NAVTA. And you said you're getting excited, and a lot of this is driven by the wanting to advocate for the professionals in this
Mhm.
capacity, are you enjoying the relationship part? Are you enjoying this bigger mission that you see? Like if you think about kind of like the heart of what keeps driving you in this time, how would you put words behind it?
What drives me during that time was I feel like if people would just get involved, like a lot of state vet tech associations are, hurting for membership and hurting to have those people advocating for them. And once I realized what could be done in that, making those relationships, like that's how we get to that next level. And so I saw what everybody was wanting, either in the state or, through the United States, through NAFTA, all the places I lived, it was always, people were wanting the same things, but there are so many different things they were doing that hadn't what's the word when the definitions of insanity is doing the same things over and over and getting the same results. So that's one thing I try to live by is to not do that. I'm like, okay. And then my neurodivergent brain always thinks big picture. So when I see that certain pathways haven't worked, I try to pivot and see that big picture and what's another pathway I can get to that big picture? And so it been a lot to me to do it. Everything I've done has simply come from raising my hand and saying, I'll do it. Like, if I could just say one thing, just raise your hand, volunteer. Some volunteer, some are paid, some are this, but it's that being willing to step up for your fellow man, woman, whatever you put that to be. And I just realized if not me, who? And if not now, when? And so I just loved it though. I was like, I feel like I can make a difference and I'm gonna change vet tech's lives. And that's what everybody does in a sense. They're like, I can change this. We can do this together. So that's kind of what drove me then and what still does now.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's not an immediate result. And we
Mhm.
need people who
Oh no.
can think of big picture and understand that some things take time because when it comes to government, things take time. And you were
Yeah.
even talking about that before. I was like, oh, I just heard this on a news podcast in veterinary medicine, and you're like, oh yeah, I started that back in 2022. So, things just take a little bit of time, and having someone who sees that and can keep pushing, I think is so important. So love the message also is raising your hand, getting involved, that individuals can make impact. Now, I'm so curious, do you remember the first time that you read some type of legal document and like it
Mhm.
made sense? Because I think if I tried to look at a legal document, I would just sit down and cry. But you
Yeah.
that this is one of your gifts. So do you remember the first time maybe reading something like this and it clicking and how did you start to realize, oh, like I get this. I can connect dots and this is like a superpower. Do you remember that at all or
Absolutely. I think when I realized it is in my tenure as president of NAVTA, and we had plans to create a government relations committee. And so I got to create that in 2022. Like, I guess we started creating it in 2021. And then I got to pick the co-chairs, and then I got to build the committee and, interview people from all over. But it wasn't until I got to see in just those few short years, we were active in over 35 states. So I had to read all these different states' practice acts or go to their websites or learn their legislative calendar or learn this. And then me and my co-chairs, we would actually like sit in on legislative hearings because it was during COVID, they're all on Zoom. And so we're like eating popcorn. We're like, oh, did you just hear that? Oh, it's going to be a good one. And they're all different. So I realized like underline means we're going to add it. Strike through means we're going to take it away. So, I got to read all the bill proposals. I got to read, different legislation, credentialing. And so just a vast array and, more than half the country, and they're all different. So I was like, I'm really good at this. And I was like, I understand it. I understand what legislators want. They want to protect the public. And then I got to sit in a regulatory seat, which even, helped me advance that even more. And I was like, oh my gosh, the world is like, I get this. And to me, I have, I was talking to you, I have a huge injustice factor. Like, what's fair? And so to me and my special brain, I see the law as fairness. And not all laws are fair. Not all things that are legal are ethical. But like, you get to do something about it. You go to the legislator, you say, this sort of a change, you propose a bill, you do all these things, and like that's how you change the world. And you change your community, you change the state, you change the nation. This is how we get to those different measures, because there's not a whole lot of, especially veterinary technicians, represented in that realm. And so I found I was in a lot of rooms where there weren't people that maybe resonate with me. And then there were also people that didn't really know who I was and would speak freely. And I'm like, you do know I'm a vet tech, right? Like, so I ran into a lot of those kind of factors too. But that's where I realized it was, just because I had so many different samples in front of me, that I was like, oh, these all make sense. And then everybody was like, these make sense to you? And I was like, yeah, this is what they want. This is what they want. I was like, and over there, that's what they want. I was good at it. And I was like, this is my thing.
And thank goodness, because we need people not only to have the big vision and the passion behind it, but also to be able to understand the nitty gritty stuff that can actually physically move things forward. So passion is important, but also having the skills of knowing how things work, the systems behind things, is super critical. And so, systems may not be a sexy term to a lot of people, but that's how things work, right? And that's what you have to do to move things forward. I love that this is how change can happen, and you're there being a part of it. So like you said, you established NAVTA's first government relations committee, and, a lot has happened since then. I kind of want to just open it up. There have been so many hot topics in the past few years around this. What do you think have been some of the biggest milestones that you've been able to be a part of in this area that you want to make sure people know about, and maybe even share some different perspectives that maybe not everybody gets to hear?
Yeah, that was one thing that I took to heart when I was NAVTA president, because you read social media, you come across it, and everybody's like, it doesn't do anything. NAVTA doesn't do this. I'm like, we do stuff all the time. I'm working so hard. And so, one thing I want people to know that I don't think the general veterinary profession knows about is that there's always something going on. Like, at any given time, there's so many things, like a few big key things. So I want veterinary technicians to know that in 2023, NAVTA, we supported legislation for VTSs in Arkansas to be able to, if you were a VTS, you could do a collaborative practice agreement with a veterinarian, and you could do that initial VCPR and see that patient. The veterinarian who's in that collaborative practice agreement with you would have to see that patient within 15 days. But, at the start of that bill, we had prescriptive rights in there. We had different things. And so we were really trying to champion that veterinary technician specialist and their important roles that they do. We got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of Zoom calls from legal in a lot of places. And I was like, look, I know my job as a NAVTA president is to support vet techs. So that's what I'm going to do. So it doesn't matter how you rain down on me. This is what it's going to be, and when I was president, I could say that. I could be like, no, this is what we're going to do. And so that was a big one in 2023 that I don't think a lot of people know. was a big champion for veterinary technicians. And then, in recent years, there's been a lot of talk around the veterinary professional associate. And I got to help, because I have the legislative knack. So I got to help and, work behind the scenes. And I worked on that campaign for 2 years. And I worked behind the scenes to give them the perspective of the veterinary technician. That was my role, to make sure the veterinary technician's voice was not forgotten in this venture. And so there are two kind of realms that the veterinary professional associate can go by. And it kind of mirrors off human med. So you have your nurse practitioner route, which we say is the veterinary technician. So 2-year, 4-year, with a bachelor's, and then they get that master's in veterinary clinical care. So that's the nurse practitioner route. And then you have the physician's assistant route, which is where you have like the CSU model, where people who have 4-year degrees, or it could still be vet techs. I think a lot of people forget that techs with bachelors, they are just as much in the game, but there's only 10% of people get into vet school that apply. So there's a lot of people in that realm. And, who are we to say, no, not you? Who are we to tell anybody that's not, no, you can't do this? So I think that's a big one. And we took it to a ballot measure to let the people decide. And I really think that the public understands, an associate's leads to a bachelor's, leads to a master's. They get that. They get how it serves the public. And that's what they understand. And I think some kind of others, they don't understand, maybe the physician's assistant route where, somebody could maybe not have any clinical experience, but then go into that master's in veterinary clinical care. And so I've also helped with, Florida's had a VPA bill for the last 2 years. They'll put it out again this year. And so usually it takes a couple of years for a bill to go through. But just like each of these states also with telemedicine has gone through in legislation. And then we got a lot of wins for the vet tech community in the past couple of years. So we got, credentialing in some states. We got veterinary technicians on state boards. We got, anything you can imagine. Like, we ventured for it. We're like, we're going for it. And we always worked with the state Vet Tech Association and what they wanted. We would always call them first and be like, I'm just saying New Jersey as an example. I'm not saying they called. New Jersey, what is it that you need? And they're like, we don't have credentialing. We'd really like to get, credentialing here. So that's where we would start having those conversations with state boards, with state BMAs. Like, do you have a veterinary school in your state? Do you have an active state vet tech association? Do you have a relationship between that state vet tech association and that BMA? Like, these are all things that could contribute to how this plays out. And I don't know. I just want people to know that there's different perspectives to all these legal things, that they may only hear one particular side, but there's sides to everything. And especially with that VPA, like, LMU already had graduates of the MVCC program, the Masters in Veterinary Clinical Care, that only credentialed technicians could sit for that role. Like, only credentialed technicians with a bachelor's can get into the LMU Masters in Veterinary Clinical. So when the world was raining down on this, horrible VPA, and I hate the word mid-level professional, so I try to stick away from that, but, call them VPAs. But, there was just a huge misunderstanding, and a lot of the vet tech community was like, they're just totally bypassing us. And I was like, no, not at all. Like, I've worked hard to make sure the vet tech community is in this. Like, you were the first graduates to be here. Like, that's how far, we made it. So I just think there was a lot of misunderstanding around legislation. And those are a big, key point that I like to put in the air. And also having, a technician on the state boards, like we were talking about earlier. I think this is a great time to lead into that is, the Government Relations Committee wrote a proposal. We looked at how many states had a veterinary technician on the state board. And I even had a talk with the attorney of the AAVSB. And, I go to the yearly conferences. I sit on a state board. And if, legality wise, if a state, let's just say we'll call state A, if state A is, credentialing and taking money from veterinary technicians to credential them, and then they are getting sanctioned. So say, they have a complaint against them, and then they're getting sanctioned and punished, and they do not have a representative for veterinary technician on that state board, that is a state level antitrust issue. It's illegal. Like, you can be sued for that. And so when we put forth, as a government relations, we saw that there were only 26 states that had a veterinary technician represented in a voting capacity or an advisory capacity, and maybe only one. There's a couple of states that got 2 out there, and I'm super proud of them. But, a lot of them just have the 1. And I was like, okay, so we got that. We know that there's antitrust violation if we aren't doing this the right way. So how many states credential? So we're like, how many do have a voluntary credential? And in 2022, during our presidency, we also came out with the title protection report, which we put out, like, everybody who's got title protection, everybody who's got this, what are they called? And that was a huge report. And that's thanks to Ken Yagi, who came before me. He championed that. And it, a dog kind of rolls down. But so we put forth to the NAVTA board, like, we've looked at AABSB's bylaws. We can put forth a resolution. If you are an association, a committee, or a member board, you can put forth a resolution. So we put that forward as an association that. And so then it was voted on last year in 2024 by the AABSB membership boards. And I was there. I was like, you should put a vet tech on every state board. Also, because it's illegal if you don't. You're setting yourself up. So they passed that resolution. And then the plan was, let's create a vet tech task force that works throughout 2024 and the 2025 year. And when they come back next year at the 2025 conference, that task force to put a vet tech on every state board will come back with their findings. And so they came back with their findings. The AABSB board, their executive board, they're like, we recommend that you do this because XYZ. And so that's how, it kind of came to fruition that, now they're saying we're going to champion vet techs and we're going to advocate for a vet tech on every state board. But I want us to be cautious about this decision, because are we only doing this because it's illegal to one realm, or are we doing it because it's the right thing to do for people? So that's where I have my conflict. And that's where my, legal hat comes in, which even with my legal hat, I'm like, we should be doing this. Because there's only 6 states that don't credential in any way. And so, we can do the math there. There's a difference there. So we've got some states playing the game that they shouldn't be playing here. They should have representation.
And I keep thinking, thank goodness you're in this. I don't know if anybody else feels like, oh, this is going over my head just a smidge. But I'm so excited to hear that, you're working on a master's in legal study at Purdue. You're on lots of different boards and committees and coalitions and all of the things, moving these things forward and being the voice there. And then I also recently read that you started a project called Vibe Vet as well. Is that correct? Is that a new project?
So that's our DBA, Vibe Vet. So Vibe stands for the Veterinary Industry Board for Empowerment. And what that is we will, I don't know when does this air?
In a few weeks.
In a few weeks. So in a few weeks, it'll be right about time. I was going to do full launch for Vet Tech Week. But I was like, you know what? I was like, I don't want to have my founding visionaries working on Vet Tech Week. I was like, everybody should get to celebrate. I was like, you know what? We'll push back the launch. The founder in me wanted to launch and be like, Vet Techs, I love you. Let's launch on Vet Tech Week. So we're going to push it back a little bit. But so it's a new national association, and it has a federated governance. So where everybody gets a voice at the table that is dealing with legislation, is dealing with policies and procedures for the profession. Because generally, all of our policies and procedures and, our legislative tactics have been chosen by the AVMA House of Delegates. And they have the best intentions. But sometimes if you don't have other people represented, your best intentions can actually hinder or harm other people. And so I wanted to bring everyone to the table. So we have in our founding visionaries, which I chose, I said 25 to 35, but I actually came out with like 40 something. I was like, everybody come on in. So I actually have founding visionaries that are DVMs, veterinary technician specialists, educators, DIB professionals. I even wanted to make sure that animal sector professionals, those are people who are like on the realm of veterinary medicine, but they're not in a clinical role. So say like animal control officers, dog trainers, zoologists, like people who don't fit into those traditional roles, they've kind of always been left to the side. And I was like, you know what? Come on in here. We're doing this. So basically, we're creating a federated governance structure where we're still using the same 11 districts, just like we're mirroring it to be fluid with AVMA and NAVTA. So we have representation from every demographic, every district, and every role, every partnership. So over a year, I created, bylaws and governance documents and all this. But I didn't want to be like, hey, Batman, I made this for you. You should use it. I wanted everybody to have a say-so in that from the creation and be like, no, this was made by everyone for everyone. So what the founding visionaries are doing right now is they're deciding those governing documents. They're deciding what does that board structure look like. And it's a shared board structure. It's not like your traditional affiliated organizations where you just have veterinarians, or you just have veterinary technicians, or you just have hospital managers, you just have receptionists, because that's traditionally what we've done in this field. And me being like, well, insanity, something we're doing is not working. We're losing a lot of people. We're losing a lot of good people. And the latest demographic came out that credentialed veterinary technicians last 4 to 6 years. And that's awful. So I'm hoping to bring some people back. I envision that, veterinary medicine is like a boat, and there's this huge hole in our boat, and we don't do anything about the boat. We just keep, the water's coming in, and we're just like, well, we're just going to leave that hole there. And so I want to plug the hole in the boat. Look, I don't want to lose anybody else. And so with that, we'll be one of the first associations. We are actually championing professional liability insurance for not only veterinarians, but support roles as well. So we've sent out a ton of RFPs to different things. And at the end of the month is when our due date is to get those proposals back and work on that. But that's something that's never been offered. And there's also never been an association for veterinary assistants, which are 100,000 in the field. Statistic-wise, there's 100,000 that nobody's helping. Nobody's saying anything to. And so, I see all this with title protection, and we want to champion that. We want to build every role up. And I when people say I'm just a this or I'm just a this, I'm like, no, you have superpowers. I want every one of you to shine. And so also a huge pillar of ours is our mental health and wellness. And, that's something that I truly believe in. I'm a neurodivergent. I've had inpatient treatment. I take medication. I learn boundaries. And I try to champion that. And whenever I can, that's what works for me. And so I want to help other people what works for them. And so we have some huge things planned for mental health and wellness. And then DIB, why seems to be the going thing is people are getting rid of it now. I'm like, no, that's going to be one of our core pillars. And so we want to partner with affinity groups. This organization is all about lifting everybody up and lifting the different groups up. We want to promote NAVTA's approved veterinary assistant program. We want to promote LinVet. We want to promote possibilities. We want to promote receptionist association. We want to champion in those ways. And so, yeah, we have an educational realm, and there's a lot. If you want, you just go to vibevet.org. And this is the first time I'm saying the website publicly. But some people have already found the website. Like, it's out there, but I haven't like promoted it. But like, we worked on our SEOs, we worked on everything we possibly could for over, it was a year on October 3rd. So it was a year ago that I sat quietly in my house where I'm sitting right now. And I was like, you know what? Like, I may be at peace right now, but there's so many people out there that aren't at peace. And I became NAVTA president, and I do the things I do to make people's lives better. It's to bring joy into what we do because it is joyful. So that's why I kind of champion for that. And that's what VibeVet is. And if anybody wants to know, they can always message me. And I'm sure you will hear all about it on your socials. Our socials are open, VibeVet.
Well, I feel honored that I may be one of the first to help promote. So that's super exciting. And the last thing that I like to ask people, and leaving on this note, a note of gratitude. And you, I think you have shown a lot of enthusiasm and openness to possibilities and everything in our profession. But on a personal level, when I say what's something you're really grateful for right now, what comes to your mind?
Well, I'm head over heels and I don't know what the word is. I'm knee deep in VibeVet right now. And I'm just so overcome by everyone who's wanted to become a part of the change. I don't know, it makes me want to cry. And I am humbled. Oh, I just couldn't believe. Like, I was like, this is just an idea that came to be. And I'm just so humbled that, we've had AI companies want to invest in us. We've even had different countries call. And so it's like, wow, like, I'm just so humbled. And I don't know what else. I'm going to cry. Oh, I do want to give a shout out to another group, which is Dr. Christy Cornelius. She is the founder of Kindred Vet. So it started founders.vet and then kindred.vet. And me and Dr. Cornelius have worked together to where the Kindred Vet platform will be VibeVet's membership platform. And then all of the free things on Kindred Vet will be able to be shared. And then all the things that we will be doing, like teaching people, like, how to be advocates, how to be on a board, how to write a bill, those kind of things. Like, they'll be able to earn badges, like think of a LinkedIn badge. And so it'll also be able to be shared on the Kindred Vet platform. So you can put it there, you can put it in your email, you can put it in your socials. So it's just one other cool thing that we'll be able to do. And it's because of the veterinary profession, that this all is. Kindred Vet was made for vets and professionals by vet professionals. And that's what we want to champion, is that, like, we can do all these things and we can move mountains and we can change things and for the better. And we're going to do it.